Hello and welcome to the Morrison Run, the podcast where we rate and review everything by Grant Morrison. I'm Angwin.
I'm Bertie.
And I'm Leon.
And today we are reviewing Wonder Woman Earth 1 Volume 2. A short overview. Again, like the last episode, this one isn't too complicated, but it's a direct follow-off from the last volume, wherein we're seeing the effects of Diana in Man's World, and we're seeing kind of the repercussions to her introduction. There is a flashback to World War II, wherein there is a Nazi siege of the island, which obviously they fight back. But yeah, let's just jump into it. I quite like this one. I think I probably liked it more than the last one because it was able to do a bit more. The last volume kind of has to do a lot more introductions and stuff, which meant that it wasn't able to flesh out kind of some of the characters and some of the more, wider conflicts with the characters.
And I think in the last one we got a bit of we got flashbacks, but that was to serve the story. In this one, it does feel like a bit of a richer world where we've kind of gotten two very different conflicts going on at different time periods, and I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, the flashback it starts with the flashback to World War II. We've got Nazis trying to invade the Amazon island, and they're led by a kind of very supervillain comic book Nazi who's a woman. But I think the first one also started with a flashback to Hercules' sort of oppression of the Amazons, whereas this is sort of the Nazis' attempted oppression of the Amazons. So I think it's interesting that both volumes so far start that way. But ultimately the Amazons sort of win, and they kind of recruit this Nazi woman to Amazonia. She sort of becomes an Amazon. I forget her name. Gunther. She's like something von Gunther.
I think she's a great character.
Yeah, she's
Paula. Her name is Paula von Gunther.
She's interesting, and I think this whole sequence is interesting because, again, as we were talking about last time, this comic is referencing so many parts of Wonder Woman's history, and Wonder Woman started along with so many superheroes of the time, was sort of invented in World War II as part of that kind of fight. And one of these characters also invented in America during World War II, but before America joined the war. I don't know if Wonder Woman's creators are Jewish, but a lot of those characters like Captain America and Superman was created by Jewish creators in America who sort of saw what was happening. And interesting, this is a proper tangent, but I just sort of remembered it. There's a lot of talk about how superheroes sort of continue the Jewish myth of the golem, where a golem in Jewish myth is created to protect people from oppression and whatever. And Wonder Woman is an example of that in being just a superhero, but also she was literally created from clay, which is just an interesting element to that. So I think involving that time period in this story is important if you're going to reference all of her history.
Yeah, I think it also opens up an interesting conversation about eugenics with the Amazonians, because obviously we talked about this a bit last episode, but obviously every single Amazonian has, what is in the contemporary time of the book being written, seen as the peak of physical, female physicality, right?
Yeah, I think I said last time they will look like supermodels.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think obviously with Paula, who looks similar in physique to the rest of the Amazonians, her specifically being viewed as the Uber Fräulein? Yeah, the Uber Fräulein is I think it shows the fact that either Wonder Woman and the Amazons in general are perhaps kind of characters tied to a sort of strange eugenics on female and human physicality, but it does undermine it in the fact that it was almost contrasted with a later question that Diana gets asked in the modern day about her body and how it perhaps pushes unrealistic expectations on what women's bodies should be like, and she quite bluntly says there are no realistic expectations of a woman's body. My body is this way because of whatever reasons, because of very strange ones in her case, and then it's normal for whoever asked the question what the position she's in. And I don't know. I think that the whole eugenics angle with Paula I think it is very interesting, because this specific volume has a lot more specific war in it than the previous one, and I think that in a weird way, even though purely just because they are powerful, and arguably because they're powerful women, they are seen as a hostile force that needs to be pushed into submission.
In that same scene where she gets asked about her body and stuff, I appreciated that there was a very explicit. A woman asked her, "What about trans women?" And one woman says that there's room for everyone, and the Amazon code has been adapted over thousands of years. I just thought that was really cool. You don't see stuff like that a lot in mainstream comics. Definitely. Something else slightly unrelated I really enjoyed throughout this whole one especially is we get so many fun variations on Wonder Woman's outfit. Casual versions and just slightly different versions. One of them, which I could see being a bit controversial, is there's a scene where she saves some women in the Middle East, and she's wearing a Wanda niqab, which is fully covered sort of Muslim dress where her face is covered and everything.
That was not made by Yannick Paquette, though.
I saw that at the end. The Yannick Paquette had notes about being unsure about how to design that, and so got help from another artist. I should shout out that artist. What's their name?
Yeah.
Sanya Anwar.
And I think the original designs were quite striking and interesting, but lacked the accuracy which is needed in this sort of scene where she is dressing in another culture's clothes, but also I think just with some of her designs looking a bit like the American flag as well, it just could have been done wrong, could have looked a bit weird.
I think they do really well in this whole story to, including Volume 1, to avoid the American iconography in her outfit. Just with a lot of little changes. I talked about last time how the stars are drawn differently, so they're not American stars. And I think a lot of the variations on her outfit, the gold in her outfit is obviously there's no gold in the American flag, but gold is sometimes used to represent an American eagle or whatever. But I feel the way the gold is highlighted throughout a lot of these outfits doesn't feel American. It feels it's used in a way that makes it look very different from that. And the way that just a lot of the shapes that are used on her outfit feel a lot more Greek or ancient, and again avoid that kind of American iconography.
I think it's interesting here that we learn that Diana is clearly fluent in Greek. She doesn't know. Well, she learns English in the last volume, which she picks up very quickly. Because I think it's cool that at one point, I guess a good point is time to introduce the villain. The villain of the story is Dr. Psycho, this strange sort of. He's this strange sort of brainwashed science guy. He carries around this cane with a skull on the top, and essentially the American government hire him to manipulate Diana into revealing where the Amazonian island is, right? And at one point he is in the exact scene where Diana saves some women in the Middle East, right? she then returns to their like tent or whatever the army tents are called, and she has this conversation with Dr. Psycho, and he talks about his wife, and like they flirt a little bit. I think and I think at one point later in the story they kiss, but that might be during the simulation. Essentially, what he does is he gets her in this sort of simulation, right? And his whole philosophy, which is an all too common one in the modern day, is that with just the right sort of with the sort of techniques or inputs, that women can be controlled like an animal, right? And that's what he's hired to do. And I think something that I like, and this reminds me a bit of the Batman, is the fact that it also seems like he's like an internet nut job a bit. Like he does like tutorials online on how to manipulate women, right?
Right, yeah.
Which is realistic for what a character like that would be in the modern day. And I mean, that definitely probably wasn't as popular when this was being written. Well, this wasn't written that long ago.
This was, yeah.
Like now, since COVID,
It wasn't a mainstream conversation, but
yeah. Now that's like, yeah, that's a very important conversation. That's almost the way that dating has shifted almost. You know, pickup artists have been a thing for a long time, but the idea of going online, learning how to pick up girls from very strange, manipulative people has become more and more real, since this comic's been written.
That's true. Although I think there was a big wave of the kind of pickup artist thing sort of 10 years before as well.
Mm.
And it sort of came back in a different way in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So it's been a conversation, but it changes and adapts. I think it's important here that Dr. Psycho is just like a true manipulator. Like he's lying so much. He's really getting Wonder Woman on his side by like lying about his intentions, sort of pretending he's a good guy, and she falls for it because she's not yet used to the sort of, I guess, the manipulation of man's world.
Yeah.
That's sort of a foreign idea to her, the idea that people like would do that. So yeah, I think that it's revealed at some point that the scene where she saves him in the Middle East was like all set up, like that whole thing was fake.
Yeah.
Which again is another level of manipulation in order to get her on his side.
Yeah, well, is he coded as like a Greek guy? Because what he like shows her Greek poetry, and his name's Dr. Pirate, but we might get might give a fake name.
His name's Dr. Zako. But then he's obviously referred to as Dr. Psycho. I don't know. I don't know if he's meant to be Greek specifically. I didn't quite pick up on that. He talks about Greek poetry. He references Sappho, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously like the Amazonians are very sapphic. Like that's the whole idea. But I just mostly picked up on that as him as just part of his manipulation, really. It's very like
that makes sense.
It made me think of the like current kind of performative male thing.
Right, yeah.
That's very much what he's doing in that moment.
That's true. Damn. That's how I know he's the villain, because he's a performative male.
Exactly.
Yeah. But no, yeah, I think that as a villain, I think he's very interesting because submission and sort of bondage was already a big theme in the last volume, but in this one, there was a direct conversation about relationships and submission between the way the Amazons view it and the way that, like men, and especially manipulative men, view it, where, Dr. Psycho is like, you are submissive, like naturally, and I'm just bringing that out of you, right? You are like an animal, while to the Amazons, submission is just very natural. It's just a sign of respect. It's normal. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just like that just happens. It's just part of their culture, right?
Yeah.
And like I think this sort of idea of submission is also engaged with Paula, where she gets she arrives on the island during World War II, and then she kind of integrates into Amazonian culture. And an issue I had is that because we don't see much of her character in between, and her character remains almost exactly the same in between those two times, I didn't fully realize that 50 or so years had passed.
Yeah.
In between the flashback and the modern day, right? Because what happens is that Paula becomes integrated in society, and then she sees Diana, and she's like, I must have Diana as my partner or whatever, right?
Mm.
But then in the modern day, she's basically the exact same. And Hippolyta gives her this sort of belt, which is meant to force her into loving submission, which I do think is interesting. I think the idea of loving submission is this idea that is fleshed out. It's referenced a lot. I wouldn't say it's fleshed out because it's very difficult to flesh out. I think the way we view submission in a patriarchal setting, it has very strong connotations, and submission can be loving, obviously, with its use in BDSM, but the idea that it's just loving submission that everyone engages in almost in a benign way, without a sort of, power dynamic, if you know what I mean, with that fear and that control.
Yeah.
I just think I think it's good that it's used, but it's just difficult to wrap your head around fully because of the very strict way we view submission.
It reminds me of, in Islam, isn't there an idea of you must submit to Allah?
Yeah.
But that's sort of seen as a positive thing, and I think
that's true.
It reminded me of that, submission in a whole different context.
Yeah.
I think part of this is the idea of Paula von Gunther's been sort of, she's joined the Amazon and she's been part of them for so many years, and then her sort of, in the modern day, her Nazi ideology gets sort of reawakened. I think partly due to US interference, right?
Right.
And yeah. I think
I know she's a sleeper agent. I swear. I think there's one of the generals has a sleeper agent button, and they use a Nazi super soldier.
Yeah. But I think that's interesting because it's kind of I guess the idea of ideology and culture is can you kill the evil part of someone? And the kind of conflict between the worst of man's world, which you could argue is Nazis, it sort of contrasted with the Amazons and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I feel like using a magic belt to cleanse her Nazi viewpoints is supposed to be a bit ironic, because when she breaks down, we learn that she has been brainwashed through other means to believe that this oppressive society is right for her and that's what she wants, but then they're using another brainwashing technique, ironically, to change that.
Yeah.
And I think later on that leaves her confused, and that's why Hippolyta ends up being killed.
Yeah.
I think the way the Amazonian culture is presented in this is, in general, is so interesting because we talked a lot about this last episode, but Grant Morrison has talked about wanting the Amazons, in terms of their progression and their culture, to be a viable alternative to man's world and patriarchy and stuff like that. It needs to be a fully developed, different culture. But it's not presented to be perfect, or it's got its flaws because it is a fully developed culture, if that makes sense. Its differences also have flaws. I think the idea is man's world could learn something from them, but that doesn't mean they're perfect.
So not to brush over, but like Bertie just said, Hippolyta dies during this story. Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, is killed by Paula. She is activated by an American general who intends to invade the Amazonian island. And she like pulls out her heart. It's very graphic, but I think that the way that her death is treated, I think it to me opened up a very interesting dialogue about the kind of about the two ways, like the two central views on personal agency and free will that the two societies, man's world and the Amazon society, is built on, right? Because Hippolyta speaks to the Fates about what's going to happen to her, and the Fates essentially just, they say, you are fated to die by Paula's hand, and Hippolyta can do nothing but walk into her fate, right? Well, it's assumed, even though these fates exist, it's almost assumed that this sort of deterministic world doesn't apply to man's world, which I do think is interesting. I think potentially one of the reasons, I think it's wholly natural that a society as progressive and peaceful as the Amazonian society has this sort of predetermined, right, like fate and stuff. Obviously, it can be rewritten, as we see with Diana last volume, how she rewrites her fate, and that's like the whole point of the story, right? So it can be written, but I do think that there is like an honor we see in Hippolyta that she just kind of walks into her fate knowing, and what makes it tragic is the fact that during this, Diana is stuck in Dr. Psycho's simulation. She tries to call her, and there's a simulated call, and like she kind of has this. I think this conversation is like cut short, or in some way, because it's simulated, and she can't really speak. Have one last conversation with her mother before she dies.
On another point, I do almost wish using it more, but I like Steve Trevor's inclusion in this one. His sort of complicated relationship with the military. He is part of it, but also because of that, he knows more about it and knows when they're being manipulative and wrong, and will tell Diana when she's being manipulated and things like that. Another thing, I mean, we've kind of touched on this, but this comic does a great job of making you really hate Dr. Psycho. And when he meets his match at the end, you really love to see that happen to him.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. As a villain, he does feel quite relevant now. I think it might, picking this up now and reading it will kind of maybe feel familiar in some uncomfortable ways.
Definitely. I think, by contrast, we see the kind of beautiful friendship and sort of romance between Diana and Steve Trevor, where they clearly share similar values about oppression and that sort of thing. And they also, and we see at one point they're like flying planes, and obviously Diana's much faster because the Amazonian technology is much better than man's world's technology. But I do think that I think they use it as an important plot device, but I think it's good that we see, by contrast to a very toxic, manipulative relationship between Steve Trevor and between Dr. Psycho and Diana, which is a weird sort of romance. It's not, and it is, because it hits all the story beats of a traditional toxic romance. Kind of in real life. Like at one point they kiss because Dr. Psycho, he uses some sort of strange manipulation on her, talking about how I think he kisses her and then she's unimpressed by his kiss, and then she kisses, because in the Amazon culture it's totally benign to do that. But obviously that is a sort of, in man's world, the idea that a man has been able to get someone like Diana to kiss him is seen as a sort of manipulation, a sort of a control, if you know what I mean. And I think, very realistically, what Dr. Psycho does is he isolates Diana. She makes through the simulation or whatever, which is obviously a comic book plot device to engage with this sort of theme. He isolates her from her friends, with Beth, her family, obviously, with the fact that she can't fully have one final conversation with Hippolyta, and then sort of with Steve as well, where he convinces her that Steve is trying to manipulate her, which is an all too common manipulation technique in real life.
Yeah, I think this solidified, I think all the Earth 1 comics have this sort of vibe, but reading this as a volume 2, I think this is very much, it's reading almost like it's going to be like a Wonder Woman movie trilogy. Like it
Mhm.
sort of feels written in that way, that where this feels like Volume 1 could have been the first movie, and this can be the second one. And I don't love talking about comic books always in sort of comparison to movies, because I think it does a disservice to what comics can do. But I feel like the Earth 1 line specifically feels like that's kind of what it's doing. Even in this one, the art and the paneling is always done to kind of show everything as big as possible. Like, it feels very blockbuster. And even what I think I'm going to assume is a tease for what Volume 3 is going to be. There's a sort of stuff going on in the background where the US, along with Maxwell Lord, are working on Project Ares. We don't really know what this is yet, but we kind of see these big robots being made. Obviously, Ares is the god of war, so there's going to be some US war stuff. We hear Diana talk about, in this comic, the gods kind of being ideas, like more than as literal. Because in the classic Wonder Woman comics, the gods are like she can meet Zeus and talk to Zeus, and that's not really that's not an element in this one. So it's interesting that instead the US is going to make Ares real. But I think we'll see that come to fruition in the third book.
Yeah. I do actually have a question. Is Wonder Woman Earth 1 like a major inspiration for Wonder Woman, like the original Wonder Woman movie?
It wouldn't have been, because it came out a year before. Like, Volume 1 came out a year before, so... And I think...
Okay, fair enough then.
I quite like that first Wonder Woman movie, but I think it's doing a much more, like... Even though I talk about this as like a blockbuster, there's so many elements of it that would never be in a massive Hollywood movie, like all the bondage elements and everything. And the Wonder Woman movie has a much sort of straighter and traditional version of the Wonder Woman origin, whereas this is I feel like it's so much more subversive, this comic.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's clear, obviously with the death of Hippolyta happening, right? It's clear that Nubia is going to have to become the new leader of the Amazons, and obviously she mourns the loss of her lover. And I think I'm actually very excited, because you guys have mentioned Nubia a few times. I'm excited to see... Well, the character probably won't be fleshed out too much, because there's only one more volume left. I'm interested to see a bit more of Nubia, because you guys have got me excited.
Yeah, well, Wonder Woman becomes the queen of the Amazons, but I guess at the very end, Wonder Woman does. But like we see, I guess
no, that's true. Yeah,
we see that Nubia is going to be her right-hand man, and I think I could imagine there's probably going to be while Wonder Woman's out in man's world, Nubia is probably going to be more of the leader of the Amazons. I can see that very much being a thing.
Yeah, I think Wonder Woman in man's world, I think the way they did it is really cool. I find it a bit funny, maybe just with kind of the stereotypes of... So basically what I'm referring to is the fact that she becomes a lecturer at university, or like a tutor at a university. I imagine on Amazon culture and potentially, the Amazons' view to feminism, right? And that's when she gets asked those questions about transgender women. She gets asked a question about like her body, and she gets asked a very cutting question, which she talks to Beth about after, but which I'll go into in a sec. But I think it's cool how she's become this sort of voice to discuss these issues. But I also find it kind of ironic, because in a modern context, the idea of like someone doing those sort of TED Talks, like that sort of like Gary V-esque like inspiration or whatever, I think it's more synonymous with like a Dr. Psycho character than it would be with Diana, and I think that's bad. But I think it's just perhaps with my reading, I just found it a bit funnier.
I was gonna say I quite liked her role as a public speaker. We see it a couple times in this, and I think it shows her as a superhero that can change the world and make a positive impact without just violence all the time. Because
that's 100%.
this superhero stories are always talking about not being violent and not killing people, but ultimately every story still has a massive fight and revolves around violence. But actually seeing a big part of this story be Wonder Woman using different methods such as public speaking to be a positive impact, I think is really cool.
I think you're right, because I think what I expected, with there being an overall theme of manipulation, to see more of the corporate media manipulation of Wonder Woman's image, which we don't really see. It is more about what you just said about her being a public speaker, and I thought it was maybe going to go the other way, to be honest.
Yeah, it really, when we see, there's a big splash page towards the start, we see Wonder Woman hit a baseball from one field into another field. It's a pretty
cool.
It's a pretty awesome massive splash page. And then right after that there's a splash page of Wonder Woman on the front of a bunch of magazines, and she's in all the media and everything. And that's first of all just a really fun splash page, because she's like Woman of the Year and all these sort of things. But also it really reminded me, just another element of Wonder Woman history, in the 80s George Perez stuff, there's this whole arc with Mindy Mayer, who is Wonder Woman's publicist, and so we get a lot of similar imagery in those comics of Wonder Woman on all these magazines, and in those comics that is part of an arc of Wonder Woman kind of learning the problems with that kind of publicity in the media and how people are just making money off her. But that's not so much explored in here, but I just think it's an interesting little bit of Wonder Woman history that's being referenced.
Yeah. I think the question that she gets asked, that she talks to Beth about after, is that she basically, it's a very classic question about how, if you recognize that the patriarchy is so bad, why are you giving us hope rather than weapons, right? It's I guess it's kind of that conversation in, also I don't want to just compare it to movies, but in Black Panther it's like, why isn't a society that is clearly interested in supporting an oppressed group using its vast resources to help that group fight back? And I think Diana gives her the answer that they're a peaceful society, but I do think that with the whole Project Ares, that theme of violence versus peace is going to be engaged with, because with the loving submission thing, everything that in a patriarchal context we would view as inherently conflictual, like submission or whatever, the idea that peace can be forced is quite normal in Amazon culture. I think it'll be interesting to see how they play with that with the final volume.
I'm really interested as well, because like I said about it sort of being like a movie trilogy has an ending. And that doesn't mean Wonder Woman's gonna die or whatever. But this isn't an ongoing Wonder Woman comic that's gonna go on forever. So I'm really interested how it reckons with all of the Wonder Woman themes in the final volume.
Yeah.
Another thing you touched on earlier, but I just was thinking about it, I wanted to bring it up again. When she gets asked about having an unrealistic body image, I mean, that's quite an interesting conversation, because she's a fictional comic book character, so it's she does have she's drawn the way the Eyes wants to draw her and stuff. But I do think that's an interesting real life conflict that exists, where we can talk a lot about how the media, and society presents and promotes a certain image, a certain body image or whatever that is unrealistic for a lot of people. You can't, it's unfair and wrong to tell a person that their body, or it could be their body or it could be something else, but that their body is unrealistic or wrong. That's you can't say that. That's rude to say to a person. It's correct to talk about how society views it, but sometimes we make things personal when they're not. I hope that made sense.
No, yeah, that makes sense. The question isn't played off as accusatory, and Dana deals with it quite well. But I think what you're touching on is the fact that just because the media might portray certain celebrities' bodies as desirable and that places expectations on average people, this isn't necessarily the fault of celebrities. I think the difference will be the fact that, like, Diana isn't selling out or whatever to these media companies. She's still on the side of the oppressed, when maybe in man's world, under capitalism or whatever, a celebrity, someone with Diana's body, would use it to sell and to exploit.
It reminds me of there's some conversation about how, like, some female teachers get criticized for the way they dress because they're apparently, you know, it's too sexual or too revealing to be around kids, when if they had a body type that was considered less sexual, they would not be criticized for that. So it kind of relates to that whole conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I don't just want to say, like, the art's good again, because we kind of touched on that quite a bit in the last one. So
well, yeah, the art is still great. I think there's still some incredible splash pages in here, especially. I like Yannick Paquette. I said this before, but Yannick Paquette just draws everything really, like, big. Like, it feels like a blockbuster. Everything's just presented. The paneling's great, and everything's just presented in the most big and exciting way possible.
Yeah. I think, again, like, the use of paneling, I especially like how sometimes, like, it almost feels like the panels are placed onto the page. They have, like in scenes with Paula where she's, I think even the bit where she kills Hippolyta, like, behind or, like, next to on the page, the panels, is, like, big Nazi symbols and stuff. And I think that I just think it gives it, like you were saying, this kind of grand scale, but also a kind of, a kind of an interesting aesthetic.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, I guess we should give our overall thoughts of Wonder Woman Earth 1 Volume 2 and give our rating. I like it. I like it a lot more than, not a lot more, but I like it more than the first one, just because with the first one they have to introduce us a lot of stuff, right? They have to play it a bit more straight to introduce a lot of the characters, introduce the central conflict. With the second one, I guess, like with a movie trilogy, that whole metaphor, they're able to branch out a bit more. They introduce a crazy villain, not just Dr. Pirate, but a kind of the American government, right? And I think that I'm very excited for the third one, more so than the first one made me for this one, right?
Yeah, I think this one.
What you guys?
This one did just get me more excited to see how it all ties together. I think I still preferred the first one because I think the introduction of all those themes and those elements was just really exciting to me, and it was just a version of the Wonder Woman origin that felt, it just had that Grant Morrison touch of just being so thought out and just so much thematic depth inserted into the Wonder Woman origin that I really loved. That was really exciting, and this continues with that and does some interesting things with it. It just wasn't quite as exciting as the first one was for me.
Fair. So what do you think, Bertie?
For me, I think I preferred this one. I think when a lot of the themes were introduced in the first one, I was often a bit unsure or a bit confused, but this time I'm like, I don't know, I just think I was quite into it. I think just the way everything was expanded on, I felt like I was, well, certain things I felt like, I understand this better, but then there's also this constant dishonesty between a lot of characters throughout the whole book that creates a lot of suspense around these themes as well. So I think I was just constantly intrigued throughout this one and enjoyed it overall more than the first one.
I do remember in the last episode, I remember saying this introduces a lot of elements that are really interesting, but it could mess a lot of them up. And this volume, I don't think messes them up. It continues them in a strong way.
Okay, well, I guess we have to give it our rating. And I've just been thinking about what to rate it out of. There aren't as many MacGuffins in this one. I mean, there's the Amazon, the hover planes, and then there's, in my head, there's Amazon hover plane and there's the Skull Cane. But I can't think of any more rating MacGuffins.
That's so true. How many fates do you give it out of 3?
That's such a good idea. I'd give it 2 fates out of 3.
Me too. I'm the exact same. 2 out of 3.
I'm trying to do maths in my head if to figure out if 2 is more than 2. Because I think I gave it 2 out of 5 last time, and I'm like, I prefer it, but I'm like a bit tired and can't figure out if that's better or worse. But it is.
That's
better,
fair. It is better.
2. I'm going 2 out of 3.
Could I just ask, because last time, Bert, you said about you found, some of the reading it slightly difficult because of the way it's written, like the way characters talk and stuff. How did you feel about that this time?
I didn't notice that as much this time. I think the first one is really trying to establish that that barrier between the Amazons and the humans, and this time it's showing that through a different way, which is through the lies of the men. And I think they don't play up that awkwardness as much. They kind of, because they're trying to make the conversation seem as genuine as possible until, despite us knowing that's not the intention. So I think it was deliberately written differently. And
yeah, we get a lot more of the American perspective. I mean, there's scenes from Steve Trevor's perspective and even from Dr. Psycho's perspective, and those all
the magazines and
exactly. So
and stuff.
So those just I suppose could be an easier gateway to the story. That said, I didn't have a problem with the first one, but I can definitely see how that makes sense.
No, and what I said about the first one isn't a flaw. It's just something that made it a bit harder for me to connect with. But it was obviously fully intentional, that awkward dialogue.
Yeah, I think it's referencing. I mean, like, I feel like it's made, just referencing like old comics and stuff. That sort of dramatic dialogue that you see from those kind of Amazon characters and things like that. It just feels so comic booky, and I love it. I haven't had a problem with this in any of this series, but there are certain comics I read where I do have issues getting into dialogue.
Yeah, I do think it makes it stand out from Grant Morrison's typical writing style. I think they did a good job there, but I think the dialogue is a strength of Grant Morrison's, and I think it's just done very differently here. It's more dramatic, and I think it's done well, but it is very different.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in to our episode on Wonder Woman Earth 1 Volume 2. And I've been Angwin.
I've been Leon. And we'll be back next week with Volume 3 of this same series. So, tune back in.
Mm-hmm. Tune in, please. Have a wonderful evening and good night.
Good night.